rain on a copper dome, the color of storm, a four-story brick tower rising from black water, half drowned, ivy on the arches, a drowned orchard around it, hundreds of bare pear trees standing sideways in the flood, cut closer, a gravel road, a wooden gate, a red county stake hammered beside it, faded black letters, unsuitable for agriculture, closer. 60 ducks moving through the flooded rows, not scattered, not circling, in a single straight line, bill to tail, following something under the surface only they can see. Closer still, a young woman in a red plaid flannel, canvas jacket too big at the shoulders, boots split at the seam, 22 years old, kneeling in the mud with her ear pressed to the wet bark of a tree the county called dead. She is listening for something her father told her to wait for, 3 days before he fell from a wooden ladder and did not come home, somewhere under the roots, water, moving. 2:47 in the morning. A man stood at the gate, hat in his hand. His truck idled behind him with the headlights off. He did not knock. He did not call out. He just stood there, waiting for the porch light to come on. 9 months earlier, this same man had laughed at her in front of the whole county. Now he was here with something in a manila envelope, something he could not carry home one more night. And inside the house, a 22-year-old woman was already awake because she had been expecting him. Not tonight exactly, but someday. She had known it since the storm. She just did not know yet what he was going to say. Why was he standing there? Whose grandfather had done what? And why the 60 ducks, 60 of them, would be the reason that a man old enough to be her father had come to her gate at 2:47 in the morning, hat in his hand. To understand that, we have to go back to April, back to a folding chair in a county auction room where the same man was laughing and a girl with $15 folded inside her coat pocket was about to raise her hand. She had never raised her hand in her life. Her name was Britta Halstead, 22 years old, Willamette Valley, Oregon, spring of 1953. She wore a red and cream plaid flannel, buttoned to the collar, under a tan canvas jacket that had belonged to her father. The jacket was too big in the shoulders. The sleeves rolled twice. The lining was starting to give at the seams. She had not repaired it, because repairing it felt like admitting he was not coming back to wear it again. He was not coming back. Petter Halstead had died 2 years ago, 55 years old. He fell from a wooden ladder in Marlin Kirsch's North Orchard on a Tuesday morning. Nobody saw it happen. When they found him at noon, he was already gone. The county called it an accident. The Kirsch family paid for the funeral, and that was the last time anyone said his name in public. Britta lived above the feed and grain warehouse now, $3 a week. She pruned other people's trees for 8 cents an hour, and every night she came home, sat at the small window over the alley, and ate whatever she could carry in her coat pocket. Some night she opened the small wooden box her father had left her. Inside, there was one thing, a grafting knife, copper collar, bone handle, the blade folded in with a stiff hinge that squeaked. The initials PH were carved into the bone in her father's uneven hand. He had put it in her palm 3 days before he fell. Britta? Yes. When you don't know what to do, you wait. Wait for what? For water, under the roots. When you hear it, you'll know. She had not understood. She had thought maybe he was tired. Maybe the words were farm words. Maybe he was talking about something else entirely. I had not been talking about something else, but she would not learn that for another 2 years. And so, on a cold morning in April of 1953, Britta Halstead walked down 2nd Street in Coburg, coat button, grafting knife in her right pocket, $15 folded in her left, the whole of what she had. She was going to the auction because rent was due Friday, and she had heard there was a lot at the bottom of the list that nobody wanted. She thought maybe, if it was cheap enough, she could sell the timber, pay rent, keep going. She did not intend to raise her hand. The auction room was warm, wood floor, folding chairs, about 40 men and no other women, a brass spittoon by the door that nobody was using, but nobody had moved either. Britta sat in the last row. She kept her jacket on. She kept her head down. The auctioneer moved fast. 2 acres of pasture, a gravel pit, a storage lot, a house with no roof. Men bid without lifting their eyes. Money moved without noise. And then the last lot, 14 acres, east end of Wilkins Road, 206 pear trees, marked non-productive, structures, 1 shed, condition, poor, seasonal inundation, drainage failure, unsuitable for agriculture, delinquent taxes, $15. The room went quiet. Then the quiet turned into laughter, small and mean, the way men laugh when they want you to know that they already know something you don't. A man in the front row turned around. Marlon Kirsch, 45 years old, wool coat, silver at the temples, owner of 1,100 acres of pears and cherries in the Willamette Valley, the largest commercial orchard between Eugene and Salem. His father had died a month earlier. He had not looked well since. He looked at Britta. He smiled. Careful, sweetheart. Excuse me, you keep sitting still. The fish are going to charge you rent. The room laughed again. Britta did not laugh. She looked at the photograph the clerk had pinned to the board. Dark water between gray trunks. Drowned branches. A tower, a stone tower, half covered in ivy, rising out of the flood like a chimney of a sunken cathedral. She had never seen the tower before in her life, but she felt something, small and sharp, like a bee sting behind her ribs. She raised her hand. 15. The room did not laugh, not this time. It did the other thing. It went silent, all at once, as if someone had shut the door on the wind. Marlon Kirsch turned all the way around in his chair. He looked at her for a long second. Then he laughed. Only him. 15 going once. The auctioneer's voice was flat. Going twice. Nobody bid against her. Sold to the young lady in the back. Britta walked to the desk. She did not remember standing up. She unfolded the $15. She placed them on the wood. She signed her name, Britta Halstead. The clerk pushed a paper toward her. You know what you just bought? Yes, sir. You know it don't drain. I heard. You know the county's not fixing it. I heard that too. He looked at her. He had gray hair, reading glasses on a chain. His nameplate said Delmar Hensley. He had signed her father's death certificate 2 years ago. He did not remember her, but she remembered him. Miss Halstead, this is a quit claim. The county isn't warranting anything on that land. You take on the taxes. You take on the debts. You take on whatever's out there. You understand? Yes, sir. All right then. He stamped the paper. The stamp made a small, dry sound. Then Delmar Hensley picked up a red wooden stake from behind the counter, the kind they use for condemned lots. He walked past her. He did not say anything. He drove out to Wilkins Road that same afternoon, and he hammered that red stake into the ground beside her new gate, stamped in black block letters, unsuitable for agriculture. She got there before he had finished. She stood on the gravel shoulder and watched him swing the mallet 3 times. The stake sank half a foot. Delmar wiped his forehead with the back of his glove. Nothing personal. I know. You could still walk. Walk where? He looked at her. He did not have an answer. He got in his truck. He drove back to town, and Britta Halstead stood alone on the gravel shoulder of Wilkins Road, 22 years old, owning 14 acres of drowned earth, 206 trees a report had called dead, and a stone tower she had never seen before. She walked through the gate. The wooden gate had rotted at the bottom hinge. It swung crooked. It scraped a shallow arc in the mud when she pushed it. That sound would become the sound she woke up to. For the next 7 months, beyond the fence, water, not a puddle, not a pond, a whole flat mirror of dark water sitting between the trees. Some of the trunks were black to the shoulders. Others rose up out of the flood at strange angles because the roots underneath had already let go. Reeds along the north side, yellow grass on a small rise near the shed. The shed itself was leaning, one window broken, a tin roof folded up at the corner like a book page somebody had turned down, and in the distance, the tower, 4 stories, red brick, a copper tank on top the color of moss, ivy running up 2 of the 4 walls, 4 arched openings at the base, half submerged, rusted iron pipes coming out of the brick and disappearing into the flood. She had seen it in the photograph. She had not believed it. Now she believed it. It was too big. That was the first thing she thought. Too big for 14 acres. Too big for a family orchard. Too big for a place the county called unsuitable. Somebody had built that tower because they thought this land was worth building for, and somebody had let it drown. She walked the eastern row first. Mud pressed through the split seam of her left boot. Cold pressed up into the sock. The smell of the water was not the smell of a pond. It was heavier, something sour underneath the leaves, something that had been trapped too long. She counted the trees. She lost count. She started again. She lost count again. The county report said 206, marked dead or non-productive. She could see why. The branches were bare. Some trunks had split from the weight of ice. Fungus rings above the flood line. Moss on the north sides. She stopped at a tree along the far row. A brass tag hung on a nail. Number 187. The trunk had split down one side. A shallow hollow had opened halfway up. Rainwater sat in the hollow like a black eye. The upper branches were bare, and near the tip of one lower branch, almost impossible to see from any distance, a green bud, small as her thumbnail. She stopped breathing, because her father used to say a thing, because her father used to say a lot of things, because branches can lie, but cambium can't. She took out the grafting knife. She opened it. The hinge squeaked. She placed the blade against a section of bark above the flood line. She scraped once. Brown flakes came away. She scraped again. Brown, and then green. Not the green of a leaf, not the green of a healthy branch. The other green, the quiet green underneath the outside. The green of something that had been drowning for years, but had not agreed to die. Britta lowered the knife. She sat down on the wet root at the base of the tree. Her jeans were already soaked to the knee. It did not matter. She looked at the little bud, then at the split trunk, then at the water, then at the tower on the horizon. Then she leaned forward. She put her ear to the wet bark, and she waited. At first she heard the wind, just the wind, small and cold across the water. Then a duck somewhere, not one of hers. She did not have any yet. A wild duck in the reeds. Then, underneath everything, underneath the wind and the water and the dying wood, a sound, small, steady, rhythmic, like a pulse held down under a blanket, but not a pulse, a different sound, a sound she knew from her childhood but could not name until she named it. Water, moving, over stone. She sat back very slowly. She looked at the tree. She looked at the tower. She did not cry, but her throat did the thing throats do when the body is trying to remember something and the mind is telling it not to. Papa. She did not mean to say it out loud, but she said it out loud. You heard it. You knew. There was no answer. There was never going to be an answer, but there was the sound, under the roots, just like he had told her. The sun went behind a cloud. The water darkened. Britta closed the knife. She put it back in her right pocket. She stood up. She wiped mud off her palms onto her jeans. She looked at the flooded row one more time, and then she walked back to the shed because it was going to be dark in an hour, and she needed to figure out where to sleep. She slept in the shed that first night. She spread a canvas tarp over the driest corner of the floor. She rolled her father's old wool blanket into a pillow. She kept the knife under the pillow, not because she was afraid, because she wanted it close. She did not sleep much. The water made a sound all night, a settling sound, sometimes a small pop, sometimes a slow breath. She had not known before. That drowned land had a voice. Now she knew. In the morning she counted her money. She had none. She had bought the land with the last of it. She had one wool blanket, one canvas tarp, a grafting knife, a jacket that had been her father's, a pair of boots with a split seam, 15 empty dollars worth of dirt underneath 14 acres of dark water. She needed a plan. She did not have a plan. She had heard something. Under the roots. She did not yet know what it meant, but she knew one thing. Whoever had built that tower had believed in this land, and she had inherited whatever they had left behind, whether she wanted it or not. She walked the 2.5 miles into Coburg the next morning. She went to the feed store, not because she had money, because Junie Fenwick let people sit inside on cold mornings, and the wood stove was on, and Britta needed to think in a place that was not underwater. Fenwick and Sons Feed and Grain, 55 years old, widowed at 38, ran the store since. She had never had children. She had never remarried. She wore men's flannel shirts and a wool skirt, and she did not answer questions she did not want to answer. She looked up when the bell over the door rang. Britta, Miss Junie, you look wet. I own a swamp now. Junie almost smiled. Almost. Sit down. Britta sat. Her boots left small mud stars on the wood floor. She did not apologize. Junie did not ask her to. Junie poured a cup of coffee. She handed it over the counter without a saucer. How much did you pay? $15. Yes. Dear Lord. Junie sat down on her stool behind the counter. She rested her elbows on the wood. She looked at Britta for a long moment. Then she said a thing Britta had not expected. You're Peter Halstead's girl, aren't you? Britta's hands went still on the cup. Yes, ma'am. I thought so. You've got his mouth. You knew him. I sold him grafting wax for 27 years. Britta did not know what to say. Junie kept looking at her. He talked about you. Not much, but he talked. He did. He said you had the eye. The eye. For trees. Britta looked down at her coffee. She did not remember him ever saying that, but she believed Junie, because Junie was not the kind of woman who would invent a thing like that, not on a cold morning, not to a girl who had just bought a swamp. They sat in the quiet for a minute. Then Junie stood up. She walked around the counter. She went to the corkboard by the register. She took down a small handwritten card. She placed it in front of Britta. Mixed flock of ducks, 60 birds, farm closing, take all, name your price. Britta read it twice. I don't have any money. I know. Then why are you showing me this? Because they need to go somewhere, and you have somewhere, and ducks eat snails. I don't understand. Junie leaned forward. Britta, that water on your land is stagnant, which means larvae, which means mosquitoes, which means disease, which means you won't last a summer. But if you put birds in that water, they'll clear it. Not all of it, but some of it, enough to buy you time. I don't have money for feed. They forage. I don't have money for anything. I know. Junie reached under the counter. She pulled out a paper bag. She slid it across. This is a starter feed, enough for a month. It's on the store. Miss Junie, I can't take that. You can, and you will, because your father paid me for grafting wax for 27 years, and I owe him more than a bag of grain. Britta could not speak for a second. Junie did not make her. She just sat back down on her stool, picked up her own cup, and looked out the front window at the street. Ridley's got the ducks, out past Mill Race Road. Tell him Junie sent you. He'll let them go for $1. You don't have $1. Tell him I said I'll cover it. Miss Junie, don't argue with me before noon, girl. Britta did not argue. She stood up. She picked up the paper bag. She stopped at the door. Thank you. Go on. The bell rang. She stepped out, and she walked straight into Marlon Kirsch. He had been coming in. She had been going out. She did not see him until she smelled the wool of his coat and the cedar of whatever he shaved with. He put a hand out, not roughly, just a hand. She stepped back. He looked at the paper bag. He looked at her boots. He smiled the same smile from the auction room. Ducks. Excuse me, you bought ducks for your swamp. I don't see how that's your business. It isn't, but I saw the card in Junie's window this morning. He tipped his hat back a little. He was not a large man, but he took up a lot of a doorway. He knew that. He used it. $15 ducks for a $15 swamp. Please move. They'll eat your money before they eat your snails. Please move, Mr. Kirsch. He did not move. He looked at her for a second longer, something behind his eyes, not amusement anymore, something else, something almost tired. Then he stepped aside. Suit yourself, Miss Halstead. She walked past him. She did not look back, but her hand was already inside her right coat pocket, wrapped around the bone handle of her father's knife, so tight. Her knuckles ached for an hour after. Ridley let the ducks go for $1. Junie covered it. He helped Britta tie the crates onto a borrowed flatbed. He was 70-something years old. He did not ask her questions. He did not laugh. He was closing his farm because his wife had died in February, and he did not want to feed anything anymore. He said that in one sentence, and Britta did not make him say it twice. 60 ducks, not one of them matched. Some were brown, some were white and blotched. 2 drakes had bright green heads. One had one blue eye and one brown. Another had a twisted toe that made her walk sideways. Ridley called that one Patch. She limps, but she leads. Leads what? The flock. Watch her. When she moves, they move. Britta watched. Patch was in the second crate. She was small, brown, her feathers were rough at the edges, but her head was up, and when Ridley put his hand on the wire, Patch pressed her bill against the mesh, not to peck, to look. Britta reached in. She touched the top of Patch's head. Patch closed her eyes, just for a second, then opened them. Britta did not know it yet, but she had just met the reason. She was going to keep the land. They drove out to the property before sunset. The flatbed groaned over the last quarter-mile of gravel. The crates rocked with every rut. The ducks were quiet, except for one, which quacked, once, every 30 seconds, like a metronome. Ridley pulled up beside the shed. He looked at the water between the rows. He looked at the tower. He whistled low. Somebody built that. I know. That's a Dutch tower. A what? Water tower. Windmill style. Dutch settlers built them across this valley back before the turn of the century. You don't see many left. Do you know who built this one? He shook his head. I was too young. My uncle would have known, but he's been gone 30 years. He helped her set the crates down near the driest ground. Then he tipped his cap. Miss Halstead. Yes, whatever you're doing here, I hope it works. Why? Because somebody should. Been 40 years since anybody tried. He drove away. She stood alone by the crates. The sun went behind the trees. The water turned the color of pewter. Somewhere out in the flood, a frog began to call. She opened the first crate. Nothing happened. Then Patch waddled out, sideways, one orange foot dragging a little. She stopped at the water's edge. She looked at Britta. Britta looked at Patch. Then Patch stepped into the flood. The other ducks came out of the crates in a wave. 60 birds, loud, sudden. The whole orchard filled with the sound of wing beats and quacking and splashing water, and something else Britta could not name, something like life, coming back to a place that had been holding its breath. She sat down on the shed step. She watched them. She watched them for a long time. Then she cried, only a little, because she was tired, and because Junie had said Peter Halstead had told her once that his daughter had the eye, and because Patch had looked back at her before stepping into the water. That was the first night of the 60. The ducks changed everything. Within the first week, the sound of the orchard was different. It was not silent anymore. It was busy, splashing, bill against water, wing against wing. The scolding sound one duck makes at another duck. Low, quiet, chuckling sounds during the day. Louder complaints at dusk. Britta built a rough shelter from salvaged boards. She used the last of Ridley's chicken wire. She strung it between 2 dead trees and stapled it to the side of the shed. She collected eggs, 7 the first week, 11 the next. She walked them into Coburg in a basket lined with straw. Junie bought them all, 20 cents a dozen. That's more than they're worth. Don't argue with me before noon, girl. Britta did not argue. By the middle of the second week, the smell of the eastern row was different, less sour. The water still stood, but something had changed underneath it. Small patches of mud began to appear where the ducks had cleared the leaves. The snails on the trunks were fewer, the mosquito larvae almost gone. She marked the water level on the trunk of tree 187 with a piece of chalk. It had not dropped, but it had not risen either. Something was in balance. She did not understand yet what. And then, on the 9th morning, the ducks did the thing. She was standing knee-deep in the eastern row. She was checking the graph site she had marked on tree 187 the day before. She had the pole in one hand, the knife in the other, mosquitoes around her ears. Patch lifted her head. She turned toward the reeds along the north boundary. Within 10 seconds, every other duck had lifted its head too. The whole flock went quiet. Britta had never heard them all quiet at the same time. Not once, not in 9 days. She stood very still, because the quiet felt like it meant something. Then Patch began to swim, not in her usual loose circle, in a straight line, toward the reeds. The other ducks fell in behind her, one at a time, not a cluster, a line, bill to tail, all the way across the flooded row. Britta watched them pass tree 187. She watched them pass the fallen branch. She watched them ignore the open water on either side and swim in a line so straight it looked as though somebody had drawn it under the surface with a pencil. Patch dove. She stayed down a long time. When she came up, something hung from her bill. It was not a snail. It was gray. Britta waded closer, her boot filled with cold water. She did not notice. Patch dropped the thing into her palm. It was a piece of stone, flat, about the size of a matchbox. One edge had been cut square by a human hand. A shallow groove had been carved across its surface. Britta stood very still, holding it, because stone did not come to the surface of a flooded orchard. Stone stayed at the bottom, especially stone that had been shaped by a chisel. She dropped the survey pole down where Patch had dived. The pole sank 6 inches, then it hit something hard. She moved 3 feet along the invisible line. The ducks had been swimming. She tried again. The pole hit something hard. 3 feet farther. Hard. 3 feet farther. Hard. Whatever was down there did not stop. It ran under her 14 acres in a perfectly straight line. Somebody had put it there, on purpose, a long time ago. She looked at the tower on the horizon. The tower looked back at her. She followed the line for the rest of that day. Every 20 minutes she stopped to breathe. Every hour she stopped to write in the small notebook she had brought from the shed. The notebook had belonged to her father. His handwriting filled the first 30 pages. Grafting notes, weather notes, the date and price of every jar of grafting wax he had bought from Junie Fenwick, which was 34 jars, over 27 years. Britta began her own entries on page 31. Line runs east to northeast. Ducks follow it. Water colder along line. Stone underneath, every 3 feet. Not natural. Somebody built. She measured the water temperature with a kitchen thermometer she had borrowed from Junie. Above the invisible line, the water was 4 degrees colder than the water beside it. Cold water, under a stagnant flood, meant moving water. Somewhere, she followed the line into the reeds. She followed it until she came to a knot of exposed roots against the north bank. Patch was already there, digging her bill into the mud between the roots. The other ducks were watching, in a loose half-circle, as though this was the thing they had been leading Britta toward all along. Britta pushed the reeds aside. She pushed the survey pole down. It struck something metallic, not stone, not root, metal. She dropped to her knees in the water. She dug with both hands. Mud came up between her fingers, cold and heavy. Her right hand touched something, round, rusted, a ring of iron about the size of a dinner plate, set into a flat stone slab just under the water. She stared at it. She could not move for a second because she understood all at once what it was. Somebody had built a door under her orchard. She reached in with both hands. She wrapped her fingers around the iron ring. She pulled. Nothing happened. She braced her boots against a submerged root. She pulled again. The slab shifted, half an inch. A dark ribbon of bubbles escaped around the edge, and then a smell came up. not the sour smell of stagnant water, a different smell, a stone smell, a cold mineral smell, the smell of a place that had been sealed for a very long time. Britta let go of the ring. She sat back in the water, her heart hammering against her flannel. The ducks were still, all of them, the whole flock, watching her. She spoke without meaning to, very quietly, to nobody, to everybody, to her father. You said, water, under the roots. She reached forward. She wrapped her fingers around the iron ring. She pulled, and this time, the stone moved. The stone moved. Not much, an inch, maybe less, but it moved, and a sound came out from underneath it that Britta had never heard in her life. A hollow rush, like breath being pulled through a very long throat. The ducks scattered, not far, just backward, into the reeds, as if they too knew that whatever they had led her to was going to change the shape of the day. Britta pulled again. The slab tipped. Water folded down into the opening. She saw stone, cut stone, set carefully along both sides of a channel, black water inside, something moving, not fast, but moving. She sat back on her heels. She said nothing, because there was nothing to say to a thing like that. On your $14 of drowned earth, on a Tuesday morning in April, her orchard had a buried river, and her orchard had been sitting on top of it for decades, and nobody, not one person, not the county, not the previous owner, not the men who had laughed in the auction room, had known except her father. Somehow, her father had known. She lifted her palms out of the mud. They were shaking, not from cold. She wiped them on her jeans. She left 2 brown handprints on the denim. She did not notice. She looked at the tower. The tower stood the way it had been standing for 55 years. Copper tank, the color of moss. Ivy over half its face, not caring. But she understood something now, which she had not understood yesterday. The tower was not decoration. The tower was the head of a system, and the system was still alive. For the next 2 days, Britta uncovered 3 more access stones along the invisible line the ducks had shown her. She found the 2nd stone under a floating raft of leaves. She found the 3rd against the root plate of a fallen tree. The 4th she found by walking the line barefoot, because her boots had failed, and she wanted to feel the cold ribbon of moving water under the mud. She marked each stone with a stripped willow branch. She wrote the location in her father's notebook. She sketched the line. She numbered the stones. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each time she lifted a stone, water moved. Not fast, not violent, just moved. The surface of the flooded row shifted. Small threads of algae drifted. Leaves rotated. A pale snail slid across the mud and disappeared into the current. Near tree 187, the water dropped an inch, then 2. For the first time, Britta could see the swollen base of the trunk, part of the root plate, a section of bark she had not been able to reach. She scraped it with her father's knife. Green, below the flood line, green. She stopped breathing for the 2nd time in 3 days, because the report had been wrong, because everyone had been wrong, because 187 had not been the only number that was still alive. She checked another trunk. Green. Another. Brown. Another. Green. She started counting. She stopped counting. She started again. By the end of the 2nd day, she had 38 trees that still had living cambium below the flood line. 38 out of 206. 38 was not enough to call an orchard, but 38 was enough to call a start. She almost slept that night. She did not. She sat on the shed step with the notebook open on her knee, the lantern on the boards beside her, moths turning around the glass, the ducks quiet in their shelter, Patch already asleep, head tucked into her wing. Britta wrote in the notebook, "I opened 4 stones. Water is moving. The trees are talking back. I do not understand what I am doing, but I am not going to stop." She underlined the last line twice. Then she wrote one more line underneath in smaller letters, as if she were afraid of hearing herself say it. "Papa, if you can see this, I heard it. I heard the water under the roots. You were right." She closed the notebook. She went inside. She slept badly. She dreamed of stone, of copper, of her father's hand on her shoulder. She woke at 4 in the morning to the sound of something snapping. Somewhere in the orchard, a wooden sound, deep, long. She sat up. She listened. Another snap. She did not know it yet, but her orchard was starting to fall. She reached tree 187 before sunrise. The tree was leaning. Not much. 2 inches, maybe 3, but 2 inches on a tree that had been standing straight for 40 years was 2 inches too many. The soil around the root plate had split. A dark crescent of broken mud. One of the larger roots was already exposed, bent above the surface like a broken finger. She stepped closer. The ground gave under her boot. She caught the trunk with both hands, not because she thought she could hold it, because she did not know what else to do with her hands. Her cheek pressed against the wet bark. Somewhere under her feet, water moved, faster than it had moved yesterday. She could feel it, in the ground, in the tree. She had opened too many stones. She understood that, all at once, standing there with her arms wrapped around a leaning tree at 5 in the morning. She had opened too many stones, and the water was leaving too fast, and the mud was going with it, and whatever had held tree 187 up was going, right now, under her. She ran back to the shed. She grabbed rope. She grabbed the 2 salvage fence posts leaning against the wall. She ran back. She tied one end of the rope to the leaning trunk. She braced a post against the eastern side. She drove it in with the flat of her boot. She looped the rope around a healthy tree 2 rows away. She pulled. She tied. For a minute she thought she had it. For a minute the tree stopped leaning. For a minute. Then a sound came up from the ground beneath her boots. A soft, wet giving, like a mouth opening under a blanket. The eastern bank slid. Not much. 6 inches. Enough. Water poured into the buried channel. The tree tilted. The rope went tight. The rope held. The post did not. The post tore free of the mud, came out sideways, snapped at the base. Britta jumped back. The tree fell. Not fast. Slower than she had expected. Almost gentle. It came down through its own branches with a sound like a very large book closing. It hit the flooded row across from her. A wall of black water rose, fell. The ducks scattered. Silence. Britta stood alone in the mud, rope still in her hand, post in 2 pieces at her feet. The green bud, the little green bud that had brought her here, rested 3 inches above the surface of the flood, still alive, just alive, on a branch that was no longer attached to anything vertical. She did not cry. She did not scream. She sat down, in the water, on the wet mud, beside the tree that had been alive when she woke up and was not now. And she said, very quietly, to nobody, to the tree, to her father, to whoever was listening, "I'm sorry, By noon, Marlon Kirsch's truck was at her gate. He did not come inside. He stood on the gravel shoulder beside the red county stake. He held up his phone. He was one of the only men in the county who had a phone that could film. He was filming. He did not say anything at first. He just filmed. The fallen tree, the rope, the broken post, the girl sitting in the mud. Then he called out, "You draining it or drowning it twice." She did not answer. He waited. He filmed for another minute. Then he lowered the phone. He looked at her across the fence line, and for one strange second, his face did something that did not match the smile, something almost tired. Then the smile came back. $15 orchard, 15-minute lesson. He got in his truck. He drove away. By dinner, the video had been passed around by every family in the valley because there were only 2 men in the county with a phone, and Marlon Kirsch was one of them, and he had known where to send it. By nightfall, Britta had heard about the video from 4 different people because they had come by to look, not to help, to look. She did not go into town for 3 days. She stayed inside the shed. She fed the ducks. She closed 2 of the access stones she had opened. She packed straw into the fastest section of the buried channel to slow the flow. The water steadied, but tree 187 was still on its side, and the video was still being watched. On the 3rd night, she sat inside the shed, lantern on the crate, her father's grafting knife open on the wood. She looked at it. For a long time, she thought about selling the ducks. She thought about walking back to Coburg, asking Junie if the room above the feed store was still available. She thought about signing over the deed to the county, taking whatever they would give her, which was probably nothing. She thought about the video. She thought about Marlon Kirsch's face, the tired look, before the smile came back. She thought about her father. She thought about the green bud, 3 inches above the water. She did not decide anything. She just sat for a long time. Then, sometime around 10 o'clock, a pair of headlights came up the gravel drive. She did not move at first. She thought it might be Marlon, come back to film her sitting alone in the dark. It was not Marlon. An old truck, gray, mud on the running boards. A woman got out. Boots, wool coat, a wool scarf over her hair. She stopped a few feet from the cab. She looked at the fallen tree, then at the exposed channel, then at the red county stake. She stood there for a long minute. Then she walked toward the shed. Britta stood in the doorway, grafting knife open in her hand, not because she was afraid, because she had forgotten she was still holding it. The old woman stopped 10 feet away. She was small, maybe 5'2", silver hair coming out from under the scarf, a face that had spent a lot of years outdoors, gray eyes, not warm eyes, not unkind eyes either, just watching eyes. "You Petter Halstead's girl." Britta could not answer for a second. "Yes, ma'am. I saw the video. So did everybody else. That's not why I came." "Then why?" The old woman looked past her, at the exposed access stones, at the fallen tree, at the water still moving in the buried channel. "I recognize those stones. Excuse me, I helped clear that line in 1916 when I was 31 years old." Britta went still. "You know this land. I know this water. Who are you?" The old woman met her eyes. "Willa Kellerman. I did drainage in this valley for 37 years, and I owe your father a conversation I've been putting off for a very long time." Britta did not speak. She could not. Willa Kellerman waited. Then Willa said one more thing, quietly, as though she had rehearsed it in the truck on the way over. You didn't kill this tree by opening the drain. You killed it because nobody told you the difference between draining an orchard and emptying it. She waited. She let the words sit. Then she said, I'm here to tell you the difference, if you'll let me. Britta stepped back from the doorway. She did not say yes. She did not say no. She just stepped back. Willa Kellerman came inside the shed. Willa did not sit. She stayed standing. She looked at everything. The notebook, the map Britta had begun sketching, the knife on the crate. She looked at the knife the longest. That's Peter's. Yes, he carried it his whole life. Even the years he wasn't allowed to prune his own trees, he carried it every day. You knew him. I knew everyone. I was the one they called when a ditch failed, or a covert clogged, or a head gate rusted. For 37 years. That's how you know everyone. She turned. She looked out the open door, at the tower on the horizon, just visible in the moonlight. She looked at the tower a long time. Britta did not interrupt her. Willa spoke without turning around. Tomorrow, sunrise, you meet me by the north bank. Bring the notebook. Bring the knife. Wear boots that don't leak, if you have any. I don't. Then wear the ones you have. She walked out of the shed. She stopped at the door. She did not turn back. You made a mistake. It was alive before you touched it. That's true, but mistakes are not the same as murder. Come see me tomorrow, and I'll show you what the land was trying to tell you. She walked to the truck. She got in. She drove away. Britta stood alone in the doorway, the lantern behind her, the knife open in her hand. She looked at the fallen tree. She looked at the tower. She whispered, all right. At sunrise, Willa was already at the north bank. She had a stick. She had a length of twine. She had a small tin cup. She had a jar of clean creek water that she had brought from somewhere else. And she had the calm of somebody who had done this 10,000 times. She did not say good morning. She said, kneel down. Britta knelt. Willa drew a straight line in the mud with the stick. A drain carries excess water away. That's what you thought this was. That's why you opened 5 stones in 2 days. Britta nodded. Willa drew a shallow curve above the straight line. A ridge slows runoff before it reaches the trees. She drew several depressions farther downhill. Basins hold enough moisture to keep the ground alive during dry months. She looked at Britta. An old orchard was never built to stay dry. It was built to stay balanced. The channel underneath your rows was not carrying all the water. It was carrying the excess, what the soil could not hold. Everything else was meant to stay, held in the ridges, slowed by the swales, rested in the basins, and I emptied it. You emptied part of it, too fast, which is why your tree fell, not because the water was leaving, because the mud was leaving with it. Britta looked at the drawings in the dirt. She felt very young for a second. Willa did not soften, but she did something almost as good. She picked up the tin cup. She poured a little of the clean creek water over the drawings, slowly, watching how the water followed the shallow curve, pooled at the basin, slid past the ridge, drained gently along the straight line. See, yes, the land already knows how to do this. Somebody a long time ago listened long enough to figure it out and built it. Your job is not to redesign it. Your job is to stop breaking it. Britta did not answer because she was crying. Not much, not loud, just quietly, a little at a time, down her cheeks. She wiped them with the back of her wrist. Willa did not say anything about the crying. She just picked up the stick again and drew another curve. Here is what you are going to do today. That day, Willa taught her 7 things. She taught her how to close a stone without collapsing the bank. She taught her how to pack straw and willow into the mouth of a channel to slow flow. She taught her how to read the color of the mud beside a working ditch versus a failing one. She taught her how to test for cold water with the back of her wrist. She taught her the sound moving water makes over stone versus over silt. She taught her to walk her orchard barefoot once a week for the rest of her life. And then, last of all, she taught her to graft. She led Britta to a young rootstock near the edge of the eastern row, a trunk no thicker than Britta's wrist, living cambium below a small scrape in the bark. She pointed at the stem. She did not take the knife. Cut above the bud, make the surfaces clean, match the living layers, not the outside bark, the layers underneath. Britta cut. She cut too deep. Again. She cut again. Better. Again. She trimmed the damaged edge. She shaped the small shoot she had saved from tree 187 the day the tree fell. She fitted it into the shallow notch in the rootstock. She wrapped the union with a strip of cotton cloth. She sealed it with the wax Junie Fenwick had put into her paper bag the morning after the auction. Willa watched. She did not speak. When Britta finished, Willa nodded once. Now you wait. That's it. That's it. How long? Weeks, sometimes months. You do not touch it. You do not check it. You just walk past it every day, and you look. For what? For green. Britta looked at the small wrapped join, fragile, absurd, held together by cotton and wax and hope. She looked at Willa. Miss Kellerman. Willa, Willa, why did you come here? Willa did not answer right away. She looked at the tower. She looked at the ground. She looked at the knife in Britta's hand. Then she said, because I saw the video and I recognized the stones and I owe your father a conversation and I don't have time to be a coward anymore. She turned. She walked back toward the shed. Britta stood alone with the graft. She did not understand yet what Willa had meant about being a coward. She would understand soon. That afternoon, Britta went into the shed to fetch more wax. She had not been through the back cupboard in weeks. Pater's old boxes, nails, bits of wire, a crate of empty jars. She pulled down a metal cookie tin from the top shelf. She had assumed it was empty. It was not empty. Inside was a photograph, small, sepia, dog-eared at one corner. She had never seen it before. 3 men, standing in front of a brick tower she had seen every day for 2 weeks now. The tower was younger in the photograph, the ivy only halfway up, the copper tank still shining brass. The man on the left was her father, younger, 20, 25, his hair still dark, his mouth already sad. The man on the right was a stranger. The man in the middle was holding a scroll, a rolled sheet of paper, held out toward the camera. His hand rested on Peter Halstead's shoulder. Underneath the photograph, written in her father's uneven hand, Uncle Otto's Tower, 1921, Halstead Land, before it was taken. Britta sat down on the shed floor because her legs went out from under her. Uncle Otto, Halstead Land, before it was taken. She had not known her family had ever owned this land. She had not known there had been a great uncle named Otto. She had not known her father had ever stood in front of that tower with his hand on his shoulder and a scroll in his other hand. She had not known any of it. She sat on the shed floor, photograph in her palm, for a long time. Then she stood up. She walked out of the shed. She walked all the way across the eastern row, past the fallen tree, past the exposed channel, to the base of the tower. She stood at the arches, half-flooded, ivy against the brick. She whispered, "Uncle Otto." She waited. Nothing answered, because towers do not answer. But she was not the same person who had walked out of the shed, and she knew it. She went to Willa. Willa was at the tin sink behind the shed, washing her hands. She looked up when Britta came around the corner. She saw the photograph in Britta's hand. She stopped washing. She dried her hands on her wool skirt, slowly. "You found something. You know this photograph." "I don't." "But you know the men." "I knew Petter. I did not know the other two by name. I knew the tower." "Who built it?" Willa took the photograph. She looked at it a long time. "Otto Halstead, your great-uncle. He came over from Holland in 1880, married a woman named Ilse Verhagen in 1890, built the tower in 1898. He was a hydraulic engineer from a village near Delft. He designed this system." "How do you know?" "Because I read the drainage records for 37 years. "Then why did nobody tell me, ever, that my family built this?" Willa handed the photograph back. She looked at Britta for a long second. Then she looked at the tower. "Because in 1916, this land was taken, and your family lost the deed, and the tower went to somebody else, who let it fall, on purpose." "Who?" Willa did not answer. Britta stepped closer. "Willa, who took the land?" Willa's mouth worked for a second, like she was chewing something too dry. Then she said, "Osbert Kirsch, Marlin's father. He took it in 1916. Britta felt her hand tighten around the photograph. She did not speak. She could not. Willa spoke instead. "That is why I came here. That is why I owe your father a conversation. Because in 1916 I was 31 years old, and I worked for Osbert Kirsch, and I was there when it happened, and I did not do the thing I should have done." Britta looked at her. "What thing?" Willa did not answer. She looked at her boots. Britta waited. Willa said, very quietly, "I will tell you, but not yet, not until you have opened the main outlet, because you need to see what is under it before you hear why it is under it." She turned. She walked away. She stopped after 10 steps. She turned back. "Britta, yes, the Kirsch family and your family have unfinished business. 60 years old. It is going to come to the surface. When the water does, you need to be ready." "I don't understand." "You will." She left. Britta stood alone, photograph in her right hand, grafting knife in her right pocket, tower behind her, fallen tree in front of her. 3 days later, a letter arrived at the shed. Britta did not know how it had arrived. She had not gone into town. She had not heard a truck. But when she came out at sunrise, a folded sheet of paper was pinned under a stone on the shed step. She unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, careful, old-fashioned in the way it looped its capital letters. "Miss Halstead, word in Coburg says you are uncovering a buried channel on the old Wilkins property. I am writing to inform you that the channel you are uncovering was decommissioned in 1917 and has not been a legal agricultural drainage feature for 36 years. Any modification to the channel where it passes beneath County Road must be pre-approved by this office. Approval requires survey, engineering review, and environmental inspection. Estimated processing time, 6 to 8 months. If you disturb anything beneath county property without approval, you will be held liable for road damage, flooding, and any downstream loss. Respectfully, Delmar Hensley, County Drainage Office. Britta read it twice, then a third time. Then she folded it. She put it in her pocket. She walked into Coburg. Delmar Hensley did not look up when she came in. She placed the letter on the counter. She placed the photograph beside it. She placed her father's notebook beside that. She did not say a word. Delmar looked up. He looked at the letter. He looked at the photograph. He looked at the notebook. He looked at Britta. Tom took off his reading glasses. Miss Halstead, Mr. Hensley, you understand this is a formal matter. I understand that my great-uncle designed the system your office says never existed. Delmar did not answer. He looked at the photograph a long time. I cannot act on what is not documented. This is documented, not in the current system. The current system says my orchard doesn't have a drain. That is correct, but it does. That is also correct, but irrelevant to the paperwork. Britta looked at him. She was very tired. She spoke very quietly. There is a storm coming in 5 days. The weather service is calling for 3 inches. My orchard will not survive it if the main outlet is blocked, and it is blocked under your road. 6 to 8 months from now, there will be nothing left of my land to survey. Delmar looked at his hands. He looked at his hands for a very long time. Then he said, I am sorry, Miss Halstead. My hands are tied by procedure. Are they? They are. Whose procedure? Delmar did not answer, but his eyes flicked, very briefly, toward the office door behind him, which was closed, and on which was painted, in faded gold letters, a name Britta had not noticed before, M. Kirsch, Honorary Commissioner, Willamette Valley Drainage Board. Britta looked at the door. She looked at Delmar. Delmar looked at his hands. She picked up the photograph. She picked up the notebook. She left the letter on the counter. She walked out. She did not slam the door. She did not say anything. Outside, on the wooden porch of the county building, she stopped. She looked up at the sky. The sky was still blue, still clear, but something on the horizon had thickened. A gray band, not a cloud yet, just a suggestion, a promise of what was coming. She walked the 2.5 miles back to the shed, slowly, because her boots were still leaking, and her feet were cold, and she was thinking. Willa was waiting at the gate. She was leaning against the fence, her wool scarf over her hair, a canvas satchel over her shoulder. She looked at Britta. Britta looked at her. They said no. They said Kirsch. Ah, there's a name on his office door. Willa, Honorary Commissioner, Marlin Kirsch. There would be. You knew. I knew there would be some version of it. His father wrote the drainage code for this valley in 1920, and the code says what his family says, and it has said that for 33 years. Britta leaned against the fence post. She was very tired. There's a storm coming. I know. 5 days. I know. What am I supposed to do? Willa looked at her for a moment. Then she smiled. Small, sharp, not a happy smile, a working smile. You are going to do exactly what your great-uncle did. In 1898, when the state told him he could not build a private tower on a public watershed, you are going to fix your own land, not touch the road, and let the water decide who is telling the truth. That's not legal. That is the truth. Britta looked at her. Paper is final until water disagrees. Willa nodded. Come on, girl. We have 5 days. They worked from first light until dark for 4 days. Britta closed 2 access stones entirely. She narrowed the others with flat rock. She packed the eroded banks with willow branches and straw. She reshaped the collapsed soil into low ridges that slowed runoff. She scattered rye and clover along the highest strips of exposed ground. She divided the orchard with temporary fencing. She moved the ducks through one section at a time, so they would not turn the same mud into liquid twice. Willa watched, corrected, went home at night, came back at dawn. She did not talk about Osbert Kirsch. She did not talk about 1916. She did not talk about the things she had not done. Britta did not ask. Yet, she was saving that question for when she needed it most. On the evening of the fourth day, she stood at the eastern end of the orchard. She marked the water level on tree 187's fallen trunk with fresh chalk. The trunk was still there, sideways, but the graft she had made 3 weeks earlier, the little wrapped join near the ground, was still green, still green. She let herself look at it for 1 whole minute. Then she went back to work. At sunset on the fourth day, the wind changed. She was standing in the 9th row. She felt it before she saw it, a cold breath from the north, different than any wind she had felt in the valley. It smelled of stone and pine and something she could not name. Willa stood up straight beside her. That's it. What? The front. It's 12 hours ahead of the forecast. They stood very still. They looked toward the west. They looked toward the setting sun, which was going down behind a gray wall of cloud, faster than it should have. The ducks were already coming out of the water, all 60 of them, in a slow, steady flow toward higher ground, not toward their shelter, toward the western fence. Britta watched them. Patch was leading. Patch was not going toward the shelter. Patch was going toward a mound of roots along the county road, a place Britta had never worked, a place she had not opened, a place with warmer water, deeper mud, no stones visible beneath the surface. Britta stepped forward, then she stopped, because the water in that patch was doing something. It was not rippling, it was pulsing, a slow rise underneath the ducks, then a hollow drop, as though something below the mud was breathing against a blocked throat. Willa did not speak. Britta did not either. They just watched. The ducks gathered around the mound. Patch dove. She came up with a strip of blackened wood in her bill. The edge of the strip was square, not a fallen branch, a board. Britta looked at Willa. Willa's face had gone the color of the sky. That's it. What? That's the main outlet. That's what's under the road. And that. She pointed at the black strip in Patch's bill. That is not decay. That is a fence post. Somebody put it there. On purpose. The wind rose. The first drops of rain hit the flat surface of the flood. Behind the 2 women, the tower stood dark against the sky, copper tank the color of storm, and somewhere, underneath 12 feet of Britta's orchard, something that had been buried for 37 years was about to come up. The rain arrived the way Willa had said it would. Not a wall, not a violent sheet, a steady, deliberate fall, hard enough to hammer the roof of the shed continuously, even enough to have a rhythm. Britta stood in the doorway, boots on, grafting knife in her right pocket, coil of rope over her shoulder, lantern in her left hand, notebook wrapped in oilcloth against her ribs beneath her father's jacket. Willa was already at the mound of roots, kneeling in the mud, trenching spade in her hand, wool scarf wet through and dark against her silver hair. She looked up when Britta came through the reeds. You brought the rope. Yes. You brought the knife. Yes. Then we can start. She did not stand up. She just kept digging. Britta knelt beside her. The mud was cold, the kind of cold that goes past your skin and into your bones and stays. She dug with her hands. Because the roots were too dense for a full shovel stroke, she cut small root fibers with the knife. Willa cleared the mud behind her. Rain in her eyes, rain in her collar, rain on the back of her neck. She did not feel any of it because underneath her palms, a shape was starting to come up. First a fiber of black oak, then a corner of stone, then a joint, 2 stones set together, then a third, then a fourth, set with mortar, careful, level, under 12 feet of drowned earth for 37 years, the mouth of the buried outlet, wider than she had expected, almost 3 feet across, built like a covered throat beneath the orchard. Otto Halstead's hand in every angle, and inside, roots, leaves compressed into black pulp, rusted wire, 2 crushed metal cans, and driven straight down through the center of the throat, wedged between the largest stones, a fence post, a cedar fence post, split at the top from being pounded in, but solid at the base and solid at the middle, and solid every place a man might have wanted it to be solid. In 1916, when he wanted this land to drown, Britta's hand froze on the wood because she had known it was going to be there, because Patch had brought up a piece of it 2 hours earlier, because Willa had told her. But knowing and seeing were different. Seeing was different. Willa did not speak. She sat back on her heels in the mud, rain on her face, not blinking, just looking at the post. Britta looked at her. Willa, yes, you said you'd tell me when we got here. I did. I need you to tell me now. Willa did not answer right away. She reached forward. She touched the top of the fence post with 2 fingers, very lightly, as though she were afraid it might still be warm. Then she sat back. She spoke without looking at Britta. I was 31 years old. Yes. I had been working for the Willamette Drainage Service for 4 years, and that year they had taken a contract with Osbert Kirsch to do maintenance on all the private ditches in the northern half of the valley, and Osbert Kirsch was expanding, aggressive, buying up small orchards. He wanted the whole eastern shelf because it drained naturally into his south fields. And my family owned it, and your family owned it. Otto had been dead 4 years. Your grandfather was farming it, a quiet man, a good man, not a fighter. And Willa's voice went smaller. And in April of 1916, Osbert Kirsch sent 3 of his men down the road in a horse cart with a load of fence posts and instructions that my supervisor read to me in front of the drainage office before they left, to drive 1 post into the mouth of the Halstead outlet where it passed under the county road because, according to my supervisor, Osbert had learned that the outlet's upper works were structurally weak and a single obstruction would cause the whole eastern shelf to flood, which would drown the orchard, which would collapse the harvest, which would collapse the family, which would put the land on the market at a price he had already calculated. Britta could not speak. I was there, in the office, when they gave the instructions. You were how old? 31. And you did not stop them. I did not stop them. Why? Willa looked at her. For the first time in the whole telling, she looked her right in the eye. Because I was afraid I would lose my job. Silence. Rain on the reeds. Rain on the tower. Britta stared at her. Willa did not look away. Britta, I want you to understand what I am about to say is not an excuse. There is no excuse. Then don't make one. I won't. Then say the rest of it. Willa nodded slowly. I went home that night. I lay in bed. I did not sleep. I went to work the next morning and I said nothing. I said nothing for 1 year, then 2, then 5. And meanwhile, your grandfather lost the harvest. Then he lost the orchard. Then he lost the deed. Then he died of a heart attack in 1918, 2 years after the water came up. Britta's hand was on the fence post. She had not realized she had put it there. And my father. Your father was born in 1896. He was 22 when your grandfather died. He inherited nothing because there was nothing left, because Osbert Kirsch had bought the land at auction at a price he had already calculated in 1917 from the county for less than the taxes. How much? $22. The number sat on the whetstone between them. $22 for 14 acres and a tower and a system Otto Halstead had built for 6 families. Britta laughed. Not a laugh, a sound from her throat, which was not a laugh, but her body did not know what else to do with it. 15 and 22. Yes, that's what this land has been worth. Twice in 60 years. Yes, to the county, yes, but not to Otto, and not to my father, not to your father. He knew what it was. He knew. He worked in Osbert Kirsch's orchards for 30 years because he could see the tower from Osbert's north fence. Every day he could see it, and he did not say anything because he did not have anything left to say it with. Britta closed her eyes. She thought about her father's face on the porch of the boarding house in Coburg the night before he died. He had said one thing to her that she had never understood. He had said, Britta, if a man tells you to be quiet long enough, you will start to believe you are. She had not understood. Now she understood. Willa was crying, silently, no sound, just water, down her face, not different from the rain. I quit that job 3 days later. I told them I was going to Salem. I did not go to Salem. I went to Portland. I got a job on a different crew, not private, public, county drainage, and for 37 years I have gone into every ditch, in every corner of this valley. I have unblocked, I have repaired, I have rebuilt. I have brought water back to 5 families' land that your family used to be part of the same charter with, because I could not go into your families, because I did not have the courage to face what I had failed to say when I was 31, and I could still have said it. She looked at Britta. Your father wrote to me 20 years ago. He what? He wrote to me. He sent a letter to the county drainage office in an envelope addressed to Miss Willa Kellerman. Personal. He knew where I worked. I do not know how, but he did. What did he say? Willa reached into her satchel. She pulled out an envelope. It was old, water-stained, sealed, in her father's handwriting. Willa Kellerman. Personal. Please wait. The coroner said, please wait to open until my daughter needs it. Britta stared at the envelope. She did not move. Willa held it out to her. He knew, Britta. He knew what had happened. He knew who I was. He knew I was carrying it. He did not want revenge. He wanted his daughter to inherit what Otto had built, which meant he needed somebody who could still stand on this land when the time came to stand with her. Britta reached out. She took the envelope. She did not open it, not yet. She held it against her chest, under her father's jacket, beside the notebook, which was already there. She looked at Willa. she said, very quietly. You came. Yes, you came anyway. 20 years late, 37 years late. But you came, Willa nodded. She could not speak. Britta looked at the fence post, wedged in the throat of the buried outlet, under Otto Halstead's stones, where Osbert Kirsch's men had driven it. In April of 1916, when Willa Kellerman was 31 years old and had not said the thing she should have said, she looked at Willa, she reached out, she took Willa's cold, wet hand. We are going to pull it out, together, right now, and then, whatever happens after, but right now, you and I are going to pull it out. Willa nodded. Britta wrapped the rope around the posts. Willa braced the trenching spade against the largest stone at the mouth. Britta cut the small roots holding the post at its middle. She did it carefully. She did it slowly, because Willa had taught her not to yank the world open, because that was how you drowned it. Willow bracing packed along the bank, rye seed and clover along the ridges, ducks in their shelter. Everything Britta had built, underneath everything, was holding so far. She looped the rope around her shoulders. She braced her boots in the mud. Willa on the other end, small, wet, silver-haired, 70 years old this September, not letting go. Ready, ready, slow, slow. They pulled. The post shifted. 1 inch, 2. They pulled again. The post came up. Not all at once. In stages. Cedar squealing against stone. A dark surge of water pressed through the newly opened throat. Then more. Then more. The rope went slack. The post lay across the mud. Between them, 60 inches long, 60 inches of cedar that Osbert Kirsch's men had cut and shaved and driven into the throat of Otto Halstead's outlet. In 1916, Britta stared at it. Then she looked into the throat. Water was moving, not fast, not violent, just moving, broad, steady, drawn, as though the orchard had inhaled after 37 years of holding its breath. Willa laughed once, not happy, not sad, just human. Britta laughed too. They knelt there, in the rain, for a long time. They did not know it yet, but 2 miles north, in the county drainage office, Delmar Hensley was standing at his window, with the letter Britta had left on his counter, folded in his shirt pocket, watching the rain and thinking about a photograph he had seen in a girl's hand 2 days earlier of 3 men in front of a brick tower. Before it was taken, he picked up the phone. He called the private line of the office of the Willamette Drainage Board, not the Kirsch line, the other one, and he said, very quietly, to the woman who answered, "Dorothea, I need to put a notice on file tonight about a 1902 charter that I do not think has ever been legally dissolved, and I would like it filed before sunrise. If you can, please." Dorothea did not ask why. She had worked with Delmar Hensley for 29 years. She said, "I can." She hung up. Delmar looked at the rain. He said, very quietly, to himself, "Peter, I am sorry it took me 2 years." The rain fell all night. By 4 in the morning, the water in the eastern row had dropped 1.5 inches. By 6, it had dropped 3. By first light, Britta could see the tops of the earth ridges Willa had taught her to build, small dark curves emerging out of the flat mirror like the backs of whales. By 7 o'clock, the ducks were walking, not swimming, walking, between the pear trees, on mud that had not seen air in years. Patch was leading, sideways, one orange foot dragging, head up. Britta stood in the eastern row, water to the ankles now, not to the knees. She could see, for the first time, the swollen bases of 38 trunks she had marked as green, rising up out of the receding flood. Dark, wet, alive. The rain slowed, then it stopped. The sun came up over the ridge, slowly, gray to gold. Britta walked from trunk to trunk. She scraped bark with her father's knife. Green, 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 green. By 8 in the morning, she had counted 142 trees, not 38, 142, with living cambium below the old flood line, because once the flood had receded, she could see that the roots underneath had been surviving. On the trickle of water Otto's channel had still been allowing through. All those years, the land was not dead. The land had been waiting. She sat down on the wet stump of a fallen tree. She opened her father's envelope. Willa had walked back to the shed to make coffee. She was giving Britta the moment. Britta broke the wax seal with the point of the grafting knife. Inside the envelope, 2 things, a folded sheet of paper and a smaller envelope, not sealed, just tucked. She opened the folded sheet first. It was a hand-drawn map of the entire orchard, every access stone, every ridge, every basin, every channel, drawn in her father's uneven hand on the back of a 1928 seed catalog, labeled in his rough capitals, Main Outlet, Under County Road, blocked beneath the sketch, a single line, Britta, if you are reading this, you have already heard it. Good, now you know. She held the map in her lap for a very long time. Then she opened the smaller envelope. Inside were 3 things. A photograph, older than the one she had found in the cookie tin. Otto Halstead, younger, standing beside a woman in a long gray dress. Ilse. Britta had never seen her. She looked at her mouth. It was Britta's mouth. A folded sheet, a charter, 1902, handwritten, in Dutch and English, signed by 6 men, Halstead, Verhagen, Coburg, Sundstrom, Marchetti, Ochoa, 6 family names, along the eastern shelf, water rights, 6 ways, not one, in perpetuity, legally filed, 1902, Willamette Valley Drainage District, and a small brass key. The key was for something. Britta did not know what, yet. She looked at the charter for a long time. 6 families, not one. Otto had not built the tower for the Halsteads. Otto had built the tower for the eastern shelf, which meant Osbert Kirsch had not just stolen a family's orchard in 1916. He had stolen a community. She sat on the stump, charter in one hand, key in the other, rye seed sprouting in a pale green haze along the ridges around her. She whispered, 6. She said it again, 6. Something in her opened, not the anger she had thought would come, something quieter, something more careful, because 6 meant that her orchard was not hers alone, to keep or to lose. 6 meant that whatever she was building was going to have to be built. For 6, she stood up. She walked back to the shed. She placed the charter on the crate beside the lantern. She placed the key beside the charter. She placed the photograph beside the key. Willa looked up from the coffee. Willa looked at the charter. Willa began to cry again, quietly. This time, not silently. Britta put her hand on Willa's shoulder. She said, very softly, you were part of the 6. Willa nodded. My grandmother was a Sundstrom. She never told me. She never told anyone, because the shame of what my family had allowed. was too much for one lifetime to carry. Now you don't have to carry it. No, because we know, yes. 2 mornings later, word came through the county from 5 different directions. Delmar Hensley had filed a 1902 charter with the Willamette Valley Drainage District Office in Salem. Sundstrom's granddaughter, still on her own farm north of Coburg, had confirmed the surviving copy in her attic Bible. Marchetti's grandson, running his father's cherry orchard east of the tower, had found his family's copy in a tin box in the barn. Coburg Verhagen and Ochoa descendants had been located within 1 week. 6 families still alive in some form in the valley. The Homestead outlet was legally protected under a charter that had never been dissolved because Otto Halstead had known. Even in 1898, that paper was final until water disagreed. The district engineer came out to Britta's orchard on a Tuesday. He was 70 years old. His name was Dr. Marek Solberg. He wore a wool coat and reading glasses on a chain. He walked her land with Willa. He tested the soil. He measured the outlet flow. He looked at the tower for a long time without speaking. Then he said to Britta, "These trees were never dead below ground. The drainage failure hid what was still viable. I have not seen a system like this in 40 years. Whoever built it was ahead of his time. He was my great-uncle. I know, your father told me. In 1934, Britta looked at him. You knew my father. He worked on my brother's orchard for 2 seasons. He knew every tree in the valley. He never signed a deed, but he knew." Britta's hand was on the knife in her pocket. She said, very quietly, "Doctor, yes. Are you the third?" "The third what?" Willa said, "My father wrote to her 20 years ago and left her an envelope. Are you?" "The third." Dr. Solberg looked at her. He looked at Willa. He looked at the tower. Then he took a folded paper out of the inside pocket of his wool coat. He held it out. "Miss Halstead, your father sent me this in 1948, marked, 'Please wait. I have been waiting for 5 years.'" Britta took the paper. She did not open it, not yet, because she understood now. Her father had known. He had known all along. He had not been powerless. He had been patient. He had planted people like seeds where he needed them ahead of time because he had known his daughter would not be able to do this alone, and he had known that the men who had taken his family's land would still be sitting in offices 50 years later, deciding what could and could not be documented. I had planted 3 people, Willa Kellerman, Dr. Marek Solberg, and, she would learn later, Delmar Hensley, who had opened Peter Halstead's letter. On the morning after Britta had walked into the county office and placed a photograph on his counter, 3 people waiting for 20 years for a 22-year-old girl to walk in and know that her father had known. Marlon Kirsch came to the gate at 2:47 in the morning on the 12th of October, the cold open of the story, except by then it was no longer the beginning, it was the end. Britta was already awake because she had been expecting him, not that night, but some night, since the storm. She had been, in a way, since the auction. She heard the truck first. She heard it turn off the county road. She heard the engine cut. She heard the truck door open. She heard boots on gravel. She got up. She put her father's canvas jacket over her flannel. She lit the lantern. She stepped out onto the porch of the small cabin she had built where the shed used to be. 2 windows, tin roof, 1 room, but hers. She looked at the gate. He was standing on the other side of it, hat in his hand. He did not speak. She did not either. She walked down the porch steps. She walked across the yard. She stopped 6 feet from the gate. She waited. He held up a manila envelope. His voice was hoarse. "Miss Halstead, Mr. Kirsch, I would like to give you something. You don't have to. I know." He held out the envelope. She did not take it. He set it on the top of the fence post. He stepped back. She looked at it, then at him. He was thinner than she remembered. His face was gray in the lantern light. The silver at his temples had gone all the way to the top of his head. 6 months since the auction. 6 months since the video. He looked older than his father had ever looked. She said, "You had a heart attack in December." "I heard. My father died in March." "I heard that too. I did not come here to buy." "No." She waited. Marlon Kirsch looked at the ground for a long time. Then he looked at her. "My father wrote a letter. Before he died, he asked me not to open it until after the funeral. I opened it in April, on the same day you bought this land." He gestured at the manila envelope. "That is a copy of what my father wrote, and a deed of transfer of 11 acres along the western fence of Sundstrom's granddaughter's orchard that my father took in 1921 in a foreclosure that I have now learned was not lawful." Britta stared at him. She could not speak. He kept going. "There is a second sheet inside, a statement notarized in front of the county judge this afternoon. It confirms that the Halstead land was taken in 1916 by my father through unlawful obstruction of a public drainage feature. I have not filed it against my family's estate. I have filed it as a public record under my father's name only, because the record needs to exist, even if the estate does not have to pay for it." He paused. "I understand that will not undo what he did. I understand it will not repair what was taken from you, or from Miss Kellerman, or from anyone else. But I could not carry it one more night, and I would like to stop carrying it now, if you will let me." Britta looked at the envelope. She looked at him. He was not the man who had laughed at her in the auction room, or maybe he was, but he was also a man who had opened a letter in the wrong month and had spent 7 months trying to figure out what to do with the truth, and had come to her gate at 2:47 in the morning because at 3 in the morning he would have lost his nerve. She stepped forward. She reached over the gate. She picked up the envelope. She said, very quietly, "You may come inside." He did not come inside, but he did step through the gate. He stopped just past the Red County stake, which was still there, unsuitable for agriculture, faded now, splintered at the top. She had never taken it out. He looked at the stake. He said, "You never pulled that." "No." "Why?" She thought about it. Then she said, "Because a report can be accurate about a moment and still be wrong about what is possible." He looked at her. He did not answer. She walked to the shed. She reached inside the door. She picked up something. She came back. She held it out to him. A pear, small, uneven, with a russet scar along one side. She said, "This is the first pear off the graft, from tree 187. He did not move. "Take it." He reached out. He took it in his palm. He looked at it very slowly. Some of the gray went out of his face. She said, "Your father's part of this is over. It is over, because I will not carry it, and Miss Kellerman does not have to carry it anymore, and you have said it now, which is what needed to happen. So it is over. He looked at her. I don't deserve that. I did not say it was about deserving. He did not answer. She said, Eat the pear. He looked at her. He took a bite, small, slow. He chewed for a long time. He said, It is good. I know. It is very good. 60 ducks, and Willa Kellerman, and my father, and Otto Halstead, and Ilse, and 37 years of somebody quietly repairing things made that pair, not me. He nodded. He stepped back through the gate. He put his hat on. He stopped. He turned around. He said, Miss Halstead. Yes. Thank you. He got in his truck. He drove away. Britta stood in the yard, lantern in her hand, red stake in the grass beside her. She looked at the tower. It was dark against the sky. Copper tank the color of storm. Ivy on 2 walls. She whispered, Papa, it is done. The next spring the graft on the rootstock from the fallen tree bloomed. 3 white flowers. Britta did not photograph it. She sat with it for a long time, alone. One morning in April. By August, the first orchard-wide harvest was underway. 6 wooden crates, small, uneven, russet scars along one side. Britta sold 5 of them at the Coburg market. She kept one. She sent 1 pair to each of 5 families: Sundstrom's granddaughter, Marchetti's grandson, Verhagen's cousin, Coburg's great-niece, Ochoa's daughter-in-law. 6 pairs, wrapped in newspaper, handwritten notes, signed, Britta Halstead, 6th of 6. She began grafting saplings that autumn. She gave the first sapling to Willa Kellerman. She gave the second to Dr. Marek Solberg. She gave the third to Delmar Hensley, who accepted it with tears in his eyes, in his office, and whispered, Peter, it is done. She gave the fourth to Junie Fenwick, who did not cry, because Junie did not cry, but who kept the sapling on her front porch for the rest of her life. The 5th she planted in front of the tower. The 6th she kept for a girl who was not born yet, but would be someday, to Junie Fenwick's grandniece, who was 8 years old and already spent Sunday afternoons at Britta's kitchen table, learning to graft with small, careful hands. The girl's name was Marta. One evening, when Marta was 10 years old and Britta was 29, they sat on the porch of the cabin, the tower behind them, the eastern row behind that, the ducks quiet in the shelter, Patch dead 5 years now, but her line still walking sideways across the mud. Britta reached into her pocket. She took out the grafting knife. She opened it. The hinge squeaked the way it had squeaked for 50 years. Marta looked at it. Miss Britta, is that the same one? Same one? Your papa's? Yes. Can I hold it? Britta put it in Marta's palm. Marta held it. Careful, small, 10 years old, already understanding that some things you did not hold, the way you held other things. She turned the knife over, the bone handle in her small hand. On the side facing up, the letters were carved. P.H. Marta ran her thumb over the letters. Britta said, Turn it over. Marta turned the knife over. On the other side, older, fainter, also carved into bone, O.H. Marta looked up. Who is O.H.? My great-uncle, Otto Halstead. He built the tower. He also owned the knife. First, my father inherited it when his own father died, and he carved his own initials on the other side because he did not want to erase Otto's. So it has 2 names. 3. Whose is the third? Britta reached out. She took the knife back. She opened it. She rested the blade against the porch step between her boots. She said, very quietly, "Whoever holds this next puts theirs under the other two. That is the rule. Nobody erases, everybody adds." Marta looked at the knife. Then she looked at Britta. She said, very softly, "When you are done, yes, I would like to hold it, if that is all right." Britta smiled. She did not answer right away. She let the moment sit, because Petter had taught her to let moments sit, because Otto had taught Peter to let moments sit, because everything worth doing in the valley had been done by people who knew that things worth building took generations. Then she said, "Sweetheart, yes, wait until you hear water under the roots, then you'll know what to do." Marta looked at her. She did not understand yet, but she would. Someday, she would understand. They sat on the porch, the two of them, the knife between them, the tower behind, the orchard living, the ducks quiet, the red stake still standing beside the gate, unsuitable for agriculture, faded almost to nothing now, but standing, because the report had judged the branches. It had never looked beneath the bark, and beneath the bark, everything had still been alive.